Hello and welcome to Salem Voices. I'm Lucy Rose, your host, and I am so excited today to introduce you to a really special guest from the Salem College class of 2005, Dr. Sarah Woodson. Sarah has joined us today. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Hello, I'm
Good
good.
to see you. Sarah lives in the Washington, D.C. area and has come to share her story with us today, and I am absolutely delighted. So again, welcome. But here's the thing, I can't wait for her to share her story because it's pretty daggone incredible. From Salem Senior to earning a PhD in emerging viral diseases. How better could the timing be for that one? And working at the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which, by the way, is a division of the National Institutes of Health, which all of you may have heard of, called NIH. What an impact you've made on your journey to date already. So without further ado, I'm going to ask you in 5 minutes or less, I don't even know if you can do this, but can you share your journey in a nutshell from the time you graduated from Salem to where you are today?
I think I can do that. I think I'll accept the challenge, Lucy.
Okay, speak really fast. Thanks.
So, so I knew when I was at Salem that I wanted to pursue a job in infectious diseases, and I really liked viral diseases. So I decided to pursue a PhD in virology, really, and I went to the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas, where I spent a lot of time studying arboviruses, particularly, and these are viruses that are transmitted by mosquitoes or ticks and things like that. And I really focused on flaviviruses, but also other emerging infectious diseases and immunology and biodefense and all of these types of topics. I spent about 6 years getting my PhD. Part of that was delayed because of Hurricane Ike that hit Galveston directly in 2008. But I persevered through that challenge and got my PhD in 2011 and went and did a postdoc at the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases in their intramural program. And for my postdoc, I worked on vaccine development projects, mostly for additional flaviviruses, but also as well as Bunia viruses, which are things like Rift Valley fever virus and lacrosse virus. I decided at the end of that postdoc time, though, that I didn't want to continue to be a bench scientist. And so I wanted to look for more office type of related jobs where I wasn't having to, smell chemicals and work with
Yeah.
the cells and viruses
You
every
remember the
day.
science building clearly. We smelled a lot of those chemicals right there.
Yes, definitely. Organic chemistry lab.
Organic
Oh, yeah.
chemistry. Even the wild flies. You remember the fruit flies and all the
Oh, the Drosophila. Yeah.
oh my gosh.
Those things ended up everywhere in the building when we were doing
Yes,
those
they did.
experiments.
The red eyes, wild eye, fruit flies. Yeah.
But so after I finished my postdoc, I used my network to my advantage and identified a position on the extramural side of the house at NIAID, doing product development. And so that was really mostly doing preclinical development for vaccines and therapeutics for viral diseases. And about a year and a half ago, I transitioned into a program officer role. And so I've been really, more involved in the overall administrative and scientific stewardship of my respective program areas, which have changed a lot over the last year and a half. But I currently am a program officer for the Centers for Research and Emerging Infectious Diseases Network that we recently launched this summer, which is our new big network to really help address emerging infectious disease threats that are in foreign countries that have the potential to become pandemic. And so it's part of our pandemic preparedness efforts.
Okay. I told everybody you had an interesting story. Oh my gosh. And guys, I have to tell you, it just gets more and more interesting as we talk. So just buckle in because this is really cool to me. All right. You work at NIAID.
Yes.
Tell us a little more about NIAID. What's its responsibility? What are you supposed to do at NIAID to help public health for all of us, including the world, based on what you just said? And can you elaborate a little bit more about what your real role is right now in this new program?
So NIAID is really responsible for two. We have a dual mandate, which is a little bit different from other institutes and centers. We have the first mandate, which many other institutes have, and that's to conduct basic and applied research. And for our particular institutes, that is, infections, immunology, and allergic diseases. But our secondary mandate is to be responsive to outbreaks. And so our institute is always very heavily involved in every emerging disease that kind of comes along. And I got my first taste of that when Zika came along in 2015 and 16. And then since then, we've had, several other emerging diseases that have come on board. And everyone's aware of the one that we have now, of course.
Yeah,
In the
very
big
much so.
way.
That's why we're doing this via Zoom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, what my role is, at NIAID right now is as I mentioned before, it's really to be an administrative and scientific steward of these various programs. And so while I'm leading the, Center for Research in Emerging Infectious Disease program right now, previously I've led programs in flaviviruses at large for all the basic science and their, medical countermeasure development. But I've also done diagnostics and supported other programs as needed, throughout the years. And so I've worn many different hats, but it's really a fun ride because we get to, interface with all of the, principal investigators that are in the field and really talk science on a daily basis. We get to, sometimes work with our division leadership on setting the scientific priorities for our given respective areas. And we're really there to also help advocate for our scientific, areas, make sure that they're getting adequate funding to progress the field forward if we need medical countermeasures or if there's a particular part of science that we just don't understand very well, making sure that we're encouraging the field to address those needs so that way we can prevent or treat emerging infectious diseases or viral infectious diseases at large.
Wow, it makes me proud that you graduated from Salem and are doing this work really on behalf of the world, which is really cool. And I want to pick up on something you just said. You mentioned Zika and you mentioned, advocating. And it makes me think, I read something in your bio about a real interest in gender health as well. And in really thinking about the inequities in gender health and some of the things. I think in your Zika work and your research, you really explored that a bit. Do you want to share kind of your thinking and your interest in gender health and where that came from?
Sure. So I really became interested in some of the differences that we were seeing, especially with Zika,
Yeah.
between infection rates in men and women, and trying to figure out why we were seeing these different rates of infection in men and women. Was it those biological differences, or were there other factors that were playing, such as cultural or gender influence type of roles that society puts upon men and women a little bit differently? And I had left the bench at the time though, so I really couldn't ask, any questions that I could test experimentally, with the virus itself or with samples. So my research that I did, was really more through engaging those investigators that were doing that, human cohort type of study research, and reading a lot of articles on the differences of biological sex when it comes to emerging infectious diseases and viral diseases, the differences in biological sex for even just the immune system. There are a lot of differences biologically between men and women, but then there's also the cultural differences. And really what I found is that for Zika, all of these factors are kind of coming together. And while we don't still have a very clear picture about which one is driving the risk and the infection rates, more so than the other, there does seem to be like it's both biology and the gender influence type of behaviors and cultural norms that change the risk for women and increase the infection rates a little bit. But what I thought also was interesting in the research that I did is that many infectious diseases, especially viruses, impact the sexes a little bit differently. And so it's always this balance of, is it biology or is it the
Yeah.
cultural and gender influence? And especially for women, sometimes it's our immune state. And what I mean by that, it's, what age we are and whether or not we're pregnant, because all of these types of factors really influence our ability to combat infections. And then some viruses have, evolved to overcome some of those mechanisms or be able to hide out in these states a little bit differently and cause havoc later. And so I think it's a really interesting area. And I was very happy to talk about this at a public health symposium in Germany several years ago. But it's still a topic area that I'm still very interested in. And I think that, even in today's, climate, we still see that there are some subtle differences in infection rates for currently circulating viruses between men and women.
Yeah. Wow. What a cool thing to be interested in today's world. And clearly, as Salem begins to position itself towards transforming more towards a real focus on health, it's a really important piece of that to think about gender health and to think about the inequities and things that go along with that, both the biological and the cultural and the political kind of implications as they intersect and come together and what that looks like. Which brings me to another question while we're on that. And then I want to go back to vaccines because I'm fascinated also with that. But clearly, right now, we know that women are profoundly underrepresented as senior leaders in health and in folks who are interested, like you are, in that. In fact, only 25% of senior leaders in health right now in the United States are women. How important is it to you, from your perspective, that we put more women or more women are in those kinds of positions to afford public health for us?
I think it's incredibly important that we see women rise to senior leadership levels in science. A lot of this is also for the next generation because, people that are coming up today, women, and this is true for minorities as well, if they can see these people that are similar to them in these leadership positions, it helps to reassure them that there's an equal opportunity for entry, but also for advancement in that career path. And I think that's really important when you're thinking about developing the next generation.
Yeah,
But additionally, women and minorities, they bring a different perspective to the table for leadership. Their experience drives that. And I think that different approach or that different experience could really help move the field forward to a place where we're reaching into this next level, type of advancement in the field, which I think is absolutely critical. Science can move at a lightning speed, but occasionally it slows down and it needs somebody there to give it that next push. And so I think having those alternate perspectives, in the seat of power and in leadership roles really drives that home. And so I think it's incredibly important that we showcase to youngsters, especially that they belong in this field and that they can be leaders in it and that there's real potential here.
wonderful. Well, I'm excited about partnering with you as we move this forward and hearing your expertise and your sharing that with us as we go. And speaking of certain things moving forward at lightning speed, while we have you, I just love to pick your brain a bit as a true expert in the area of vaccines. Why not? And I know folks would be highly interested. Vaccines are tough to develop, and historically, they've taken a really long time. Can you share with folks, and this clearly is from your own personal perspective? I know you're not representing NIAID in any kind of capacity today at all, but just knowing what you know personally, vaccines are hard to develop. What's hard about them? Why does it take so long to develop a vaccine? And how challenging is it to get it to people once you even get it developed? What does that look like?
Oh, Lucy, that's a tough question. And it's a very complicated one too. I think vaccine development is difficult for a number of reasons, but I think, some of the basic challenges that most companies and vaccine developers find the first being money, the second being manpower, and then the third being general resources. Sometimes it's the science itself that can cause the slowdown and it being a challenge because for vaccines, what we're really trying to achieve is the most appropriate stimulation of the immune system to provide you or anybody else protection long term while still being safe. And that may not sound like a tall, order, but it really truly is. And so sometimes it's that science that we just can't seem to find the right technology or the right combination to get us to that point. But if we have found that point, then it's the money, manpower, and resources. Um, Vaccine development and any sort of medical countermeasure development for viral diseases is actually really a very risky enterprise, but it's also very expensive. I mean, we will spend millions and millions of dollars getting to a final vaccine candidate that's tested in clinical trials and millions more getting it to market. So, a lot of vaccine developers will spend a lot of time and resources just doing market analysis to make sure that their investment makes sense for what they anticipate the commercial market to be versus the risk. And that's very complicated. There's so many factors that go
Highly.
into that.
Yeah.
Um, So, and the second being manpower. Sometimes you don't have all of the people or the right experts that you need in order to execute the studies that are going to be needed to get, to that regulatory hurdle with the FDA of getting an approval or a licensure. And then the third thing being resources. And I think, without talking a lot about COVID in any way, I think that strain on resources is something that is present in people's minds because, you have to do a very clean manufacturing process for vaccines. This is something that you're going to be injecting into people. And those manufacturing facilities are actually very limited. And you're competing for these, vaccine manufacturing facilities for, space and time to do flu vaccines in the summer and, this vaccine or that vaccine any given time of year. And when you think about how many vaccines are administered to children and that are available to adults and that are still in development for clinical trial, it's a huge strain on the resources. And so it's all of these things that contribute to having it be difficult to get a vaccine developed, and then further, even getting it out to people.
Yeah, and as I think about this, one of the real things I think for folks to really recognize and remember is that vaccines to some degree are harder than drugs to develop. Because with the vaccine, especially as we're testing it as well, folks are well. We're not giving it to sick people to make them well. They're generally well. We're trying to prevent them from getting sick. So that standard of safety has to be one that we really raise to a high level because we're giving it to billions of people globally that are not sick. I'm assuming that plays
Yep.
into your thinking highly then as you think about the success of a vaccine or not and whether you can bring it to market.
You're absolutely right, Lucy. I mean, the safety bar that we have to hit for vaccines is incredibly difficult sometimes because people are very adverse to, any sort of, systemic reaction. Certain ones are okay, like if you get a headache for a couple days or you just generally don't feel very good. But if your arm falls off, I mean, people will have a big issue with that.
You're not kidding. And we do see those side effects at times. We've seen Guillain-Barré as an example with flu vaccine and things that, and that is for folks that are listening, a disease that causes paralysis. It starts low and goes up in your body. Those don't happen often at all, but you have to test enough to ensure that those are minimal in folks. By the way, I just got my flu vaccine today, Sarah, so I'll be calling you if I have any symptoms, okay? Don't
It's
call
not my
me.
area.
Okay. Look, while we're on research, we're going to get off those side effects since I really did just have one today. Okay. So, but while we're on research, I just want to congratulate you because as I look at your complete CV, as one might call it in the academic world, it's like full of research. So you've done a lot of that in your life. Congratulations. And for all of the, presentations you've made on your research and all of that, that's hard fought, good wins for you. Could you give folks just a feel? I think most people, if you're not in this field, would have no idea how long some of the research takes. Now, you gave an idea about vaccines, and on average, historically, it's like 7 years start to finish for the vaccine, I think. And that's fast. You would know better than would I, but I think so. So we're looking at miracles now we're working on. But as you think about your career, can you just give folks a feel of the kind of normal research that a researcher might do that publishes in a prestigious journal? And I know it varies a lot, but just kind of from start to finish, how hard it is to get something published also in a major journal and why you should feel really proud of what you've done with your research as well.
Thank you, Lucy. I do
Welcome.
appreciate the
Yeah. Well, I'm
the
proud of
bonus.
you, so I'm going to make you be proud too.
Um,
Yeah.
so as you mentioned, yeah, it can range quite widely. I think for a lot of people, it really depends on what their starting point is, what sort of resources they have, and how quickly the science, they can actually execute it. I think most people, it takes several years before they have enough data or evidence and analysis that they can actually publish. And then it could take another 6 months to a year, possibly, to publish in a good journal. There's a lot of review that is built into the publishing process, and this is called peer review. Pretty much all quality scientific journals have this peer review process because they want to make sure that experts also in the field just put your particular research through a very rigorous scientific process to make sure that it makes sense and that they agree that your experiments were appropriate for the question that you're trying to answer, and further that your analysis was appropriate for what your question is as well. And so this takes time. People can go through a couple of rounds of review for their publications before it's actually accepted at a journal. But in the event of something major, like when Zika emerged and other emerging infectious diseases that pop up, that sense of urgency can also help drive that particular, rate of working on the science as well as the rate of publishing. So, in those urgent times, I've seen people published, from, start their research project to being able to get to a publication in as little as 6 months. But I would say the vast majority of people, it takes several years to amass enough data and research that they can publish in a well-respected journal.
It's amazing. A lot of perseverance.
Oh yeah. I mean, you definitely have to get a thick skin if you're going to be in research science.
Of that too. You are not kidding. And I want to come back to thick skin in just a minute. But I just, as a quick follow-up on this, for those who are watching this, we see data everywhere. And these days especially, it's really everywhere. Some of it you can believe, some of it you can't, but critical thinking is one of those aspects we know that we all need to kind of turn on constantly in our mind. As our folks who are watching this are looking at data and they're looking at all the statements that are made about science these days, are there any kind of things they could use as kind of tricks of the trade, so to speak, to look at data as a non-scientist to figure out if it's data they could believe or not, or they should have questions about, or maybe pick up the phone and call a friend who does know, or anything like that?
I mean, I would highly encourage if anybody does have a phone a scientist option to do that.
Okay. About most everything, right?
About
Okay.
most everything.
Yeah.
But I mean, I do think the lay of the land and sometimes, science isn't very great at educating the public. So I think, scientists need to help with that oftentimes. But I think for the everyday person, I would be very careful of going on and accepting everything that you read that is not directly from one of those scientific journals, because then you're reading somebody else's interpretation of what that science means. And I think that can go into very tricky waters because you're never quite sure of what their intention might be, or what angle they're trying to push forward. And so I think if you have the ability to get your hands on those scientific journal articles directly and read them yourself, I know sometimes it takes a little bit of getting used to. It's almost a different type of language to be able to
Yes.
read science. But if you practice at it and you rely on, what you do know about biology that you learned in school and other science classes, I think you'll get to a point where you'll be able to tease apart, these things. And oftentimes if something sounds way too good to be true in science, it probably is.
I was getting ready to say, and one other thing I'll just say from my end, please read beyond the headlines.
Oh yes.
Don't you think?
read beyond the headlines. If you are just reading headlines, please read more than one headline.
There you go.
Because when you're going off of someone else's interpretation, you want to round it out and get a few more interpretations from different sources. And if they all make sense and they're all saying the same thing, then it's probably true. That's what that article was talking about, and that's what their results are. If you're getting conflicting things, phone a scientist.
I love that. Phone a friend. We're going to phone a scientist. Fantastic. All right. Clearly, you've gone beyond, I'm going to say, and beyond is not a negative term in this way, but you've moved away, shall we say, from bench research into more of a leadership position. And clearly, over time, you must have learned a whole lot about leadership in your own mind. What would you say, very quickly, are the kind of the primary leadership lessons you've learned through the years, and perhaps even how did Salem help prepare you to be a leader?
I think I'm still learning as a leader, and I think every good leader is always learning, which edges of their strengths or weaknesses they need to push forward or refine or define. And for me, some of the big leadership lessons that I've learned along the way are the first one and foremost one is to don't be afraid to pilot something. I mean, even if it sounds like a crazy idea, there's no harm in piloting it. And if you fail, well, I mean, you're going to learn something out of that failure too. But if you're a success, then it's probably going to be something amazing that the field needed to do anyway, or that, really completely re-envisioned how your working group is doing something. And so don't be afraid to do those pilots. The next is, be an active listener, be very clear at how you're communicating with everybody, and don't afraid to be an optimist and be human. And what I mean by that is, some of that is some of the emotional intelligence that comes with being able to identify those emotions in other people, but also don't be afraid to show your vulnerabilities. Because I think as we develop those relationships in a network or within your working group, I mean, that's when we really see teamwork at its best, is when people know each other well,
Yeah.
can understand how people are feeling and which directions they think they should go in. And so these emotions aren't a weakness, they're actually a strength. And to just make sure you show those. And I think real leaders do have a tendency to show those in a respectful and professional way.
And it's not easy to do, is it? I
Oh,
think
it's not easy.
of Brene Brown and the armor that she references in her books, Dare to Lead and things like that, and trying to come up with that balance, almost that tightrope of how much emotion to show versus how not, and when it's appropriate and when it's not, and all of that. But just being authentic and real is what I think I'm hearing you say, and
Yes.
being vulnerable and willing to do that, hard or not.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you.
And I think that can be tricky for women, especially just
Yeah.
because there's different metrics sometimes that people will hold women to from an emotional standpoint that they will not hold men to. And so I think it is finding that balance point, but always be authentic and real when you engage with anybody that you're working with, because I think that does show true leadership when you can engage with just about anybody, um, in any walk of life.
And you try to do that all the time because you are
Yes.
committed to teaching and to mentoring. And you work with kids in middle school and high school. You work with adults. You've been mentors to other women, all kinds of things through just your willingness to give back. What fuels that passion in you?
I think that passion is really fueled from a place where I think about myself at these different ages
Mhm.
and where I was in those development stages, and how it just would have been so nice to be able to connect with somebody that had a career in science that wasn't specifically just teaching. And I'm not knocking teachers here. I mean, teachers are incredibly important for igniting that inquisitive fire that scientists need, or that anybody in the STEM field needs, and really developing those early minds from the beginning. But when you don't know what sort of careers there are in the field and just how many science careers there are in the field, I think it's really hard for anybody to figure out a path, especially if it's not on the traditional trajectory, and how to be happy in that path. So, I see it from that perspective. I want to share, the information that I've learned, from a technical scientific standpoint,
Yeah.
but I also want to share my experience with these, young people, so that way they just know what else is out there, and that they don't have to do a traditional science career in order to be happy and be in science, and that there's just generally so much opportunity and potential that they can access.
Yeah, it's really funny how no matter what field it is, if you're in theater, people think the only thing you can do is be an actor, as an example. And there are tons of different things one can do in the theater. And you think about health or healthcare, and you think doctor, nurse, a couple of other kinds of things just kind of come to mind. And you think about all the different aspects that come together and different career paths there are to deal with health and wellness and all of those things. And it's just remarkable. So your willingness to share that with them, and your wisdom, I think, and your maturity and your expertise along the way is bound to have opened doors for lots and lots of people. Did you have mentors along the way that really helped you as well open those doors, or your own thinking? Really important.
I've had a number of mentors over the way, and I feel like I've had both major mentors and minor mentors. And, that role and that relationship was really sort of dictated by what I needed, in my development at that particular point in time. And I think it's really important that students kind of realize that you can ask for a lot or you can ask for a little, but you really just need to define, specifically what you need out of that mentor at that point in time.
Okay.
But I've had numerous, really great mentors, but I'm not afraid to say I've had some really bad mentors too.
Okay.
And
Okay.
but
And
but
hopefully
I
you didn't
still
have them for
learned
long.
something. I learned something from the bad mentors even. I
Okay.
still, needed to learn something at that point in time. And that mentor filled that particular, slot, I guess. Um,
You're a
but
very kind woman.
well, I think every experience we have, it should teach us something, right?
Right.
And that's true for mentor and mentee relationships. But I think the strongest mentors that I have, that really supported me, allowed me the space to really, quote unquote, try on different things, whether
Yeah.
that was experiments or different roles, and really help to push me in, out of my comfort zone. I appreciate those mentors the most because I feel like those are the ones that I grew the most from.
Because
Um,
they pushed.
oh yeah, they pushed.
Okay. Now,
Sometimes kicking and screaming, and it felt like going over a cliffside, but it was all for the best.
sometimes causing you to show vulnerability is my best guess, right, my dear? Okay.
Probably.
All right. Before we transition to Salem and memories, and we can just kind of have a great time together going backwards, what I really would love to do is clearly you're a highly, highly busy professional. You do all kinds of things to make our world a better place, but you also believe in self care, I think. And when I look at your interests and the things that you love, one particular is rather unique. The other one is so daggone cool that you have to share. So there are two that you got to share. First, you got to tell folks, I understand you make stained glass. And then the other real thing I would love for you to share is a little bit about your travels, what your favorite place is, why you travel, and kind of how that all comes together in your life. So, quickly, can you share a little bit about stained glass and about travel?
Sure. So stained glass, it's kind of my art therapy. I find it to be a huge stress relief, just to be able to use a different part of my brain for a little bit, and exercise some different problem solving skills and putting these things together. And then it's something that's very tangible at the end, because oftentimes in science, I don't have anything tangible, or at least, that I can show for all of my work, at least not for years
Years.
upon years. And so
Right.
having a shorter art project that's both beautiful and tangible at the end, gives me a small sense of accomplishment and stress relief.
I bet so. And I hope to put some pictures of some of your stained glass on this so folks can see it at the end. If all goes well, stay with us till the end and you'll be able to see pictures if we can edit those in.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. And then the traveling. So I'm very fortunate that my husband also enjoys to travel, and so we do a lot of travel for just personal reasons. Um, and we've taken a lot of just amazing trips, over the years to Asia and Australia, New Zealand, and South America. And a lot of these trips are because of the different scuba diving places that we're gonna hit up, because those are a lot of places on my bucket list.
Yeah.
But I really love to travel because I love seeing other cultures and experiencing these other cultures. I'm a big foodie. And so, I want to know what they're eating, and we oftentimes try to replicate those, recipes in our own kitchen. But I also see this also, I can't help it. It's a cultural or a occupational hazard, I guess. But I can't help but when I go to these other countries, I start asking them about what viruses, infections they've had.
Not just on the street, right? You don't just ask people, or do you just stop them and
No,
say,
I like our taxi drivers or our tour guides or something.
okay,
And it's always interesting to know, what people say, and even more so how they feel about it. I've asked people these questions on when it comes to, when chikungunya virus emerged in
oh yeah,
the Caribbean. We went to a Caribbean nation for vacation, and I was asking our tour driver, it's like, well, did you know anybody that had check, And he was very adamant that it wasn't a big deal and that it was, the companies that make anti-inflammatory reagents that were actually behind, kind of pumping up this outbreak that had happened. And which, I mean, is interesting that people think that, and that these types of perceptions are, or these theories kind of percolate in every society, around the world. But I always look at, what living conditions people are in to understand, are their exposures maybe a little bit different that we should be concerned about, such as, if they don't have any screens on their windows, they're going to be more,
He does.
they're going to be at a higher risk for vector-borne diseases like dengue and West Nile and chikungunya virus and Zika. And then if they're in Africa and they have, bats in their dwellings, they may be at a higher, risk of potentially getting other, bat-oriented zoonoses or, infections from bats like filoviruses or coronaviruses even. So I can't help it. I look at those things when I travel because eventually, this is how emerging infectious diseases come about. They usually come from animals, or something that is putting people at risk of having this interface. And so I'm always keeping an eye on what could possibly be the next thing that we need to prepare for.
Goodness for you is all I got to say. But I do have to ask one question. Does
Mm-hmm.
your husband do what you do? And does he enjoy all that part of the travel when you're stopping people and asking them about what virus you might have most recently had or anybody in your family?
Well, I would say I spend a lot of time on our vacations doing that. I would say I spend most of my time on the vacation scuba diving, 40
great.
feet below water.
Okay, great. Enjoying the
Um,
beautiful fish in the scene down below. All right.
Yep.
Okay. Well,
But he is a scientist. He's a
he does
microbiologist.
understand.
He understands completely, and thankfully he does understand because it's his field too, to a certain degree.
Okay.
But it has made for a very, interesting partnership of trying to, juggle, a relationship that is a two science career type of relationship, which can be difficult into itself. But it's been very good, and we've been very happy and blessed.
I understand. I'm in the same situation, so I get that. But thank you. I love that. All right. Let's transition into something that my guess is your husband won't be able to feel quite as closely as you do, and that will be your experience at Salem. Now, you might have shared things with him about it, but you're going to share things with me that he might not have heard yet. Let's just start by kind of warming up, and I've asked these same questions of everybody. So we'll just kind of, it'll be fun to see what you say relative to what others may have said. But just in one word or so, what was your favorite course at Salem?
Ooh, it's tough, but I'd probably say evolution.
Evolution. Jim Edwards may have taught that. Did he teach you? Was he still there?
No, I'm pretty sure Dr. Dunn taught
Dr.
evolution
Dunn,
when
of
I came
course,
through.
yes, because you've been there a lot more recently than I did. Okay, way to go, Rebecca. All right. So your favorite course. What was your favorite tradition at Salem?
All of the traditions hold a really special place in my heart, but I guess Fall Fest, maybe.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's been the one probably most commonly said, but not always. All right. So if you were really tired and you needed a place just to either go rest or reflect, a place kind of to get away and feel good, other than your own residence hall room, where did you kind of seek out on campus? Where's your favorite place to go?
See, this question's a little bit different than the other ones. You asked about where they would go to study.
Well,
which I had a better answer for.
Let's do study. I'm going to do whatever you want. Where did you study? Let's do the study. If you've got a great answer, I want to hear that one.
I was going to say, because if it's relaxing, it wasn't on campus.
Oh, I see.
But
never mind, Sarah. We can go there too if you want. Okay, let's do study just to be on the safe side.
So, I really changed up different places of where I would study on campus.
Okay.
I went everywhere from the library to the science building to the different computer labs, just to the grounds. I mean, wherever it was, I thought I was going to get someplace relatively quiet, that was a change in scenery. So that way it wasn't like a monotonous thing to study all the time.
I gotcha. So you had different places that you went. And I did ask one person who said, study? I didn't have a place I studied because I just didn't study. And I mean, you can be funny with these answers, you know what I mean? But I will take back the other one I asked you. Okay. So we'll just leave that for after we finish. Okay. So let's reflect wherever you may have been studying. Okay. How do you think Salem really prepared you for your incredible work success in your life to date? What did it do to help you be whom you are?
I think it's two things. One is the very low, student to faculty ratio. I felt like I had a very personalized educational experience at Salem. Um, and then the second thing would be the quality of that education and being able to have very high quality STEM related courses, because you have to have a good foundation body of knowledge, for to be able to grow in science. And the comparison I like to use is a house. You're not going to build a house that's going to last over 100 years if you don't have a good foundation. And I think Salem really provided that really strong foundational education for me that was very easy to build upon because I was ready for it when I went to graduate school.
Wow, how lovely. And it sounds like the faculty as a whole was really part of building that house for you and supporting you and
Oh
challenging
yes.
you and moving you forward.
Oh
Um,
yes.
so as we think about that too, I just want to take it one step further. When I ask people about Salem and their fond memories, I often use the term secret sauce. What was it? Because there's nobody very few. I could say nobody because we're scientists and you never say nobody. You know what I mean? Nothing's 100% or very few. But most people, when you talk with them, they kind of get a quiet smile on their face and something kind of comes over them as they think about Salem and their memories. What what is it that causes that for you? What's the secret sauce in your mind? You mentioned one thing that kind of customized educational experience that you had. But as you think about your living there and the community and everything that was there, what makes you smile the most and gives you those positive reflections that help shape you?
Probably just the overall supportive nature of it. Between the faculty and the Salem leadership, and then all of your Salem sisters. I mean, it was a hugely supportive system, and it gave you the opportunity to stretch out in your own skin and figure out who you are to a certain extent, and be able to develop that confidence in your knowledge, in your field, and generally who you are. And so I think that really is the secret sauce of being able to grow and be supported by that in a very unique and special way.
I'd love to take that one next step. I want you to take yourself back to 19, 18, 20, whatever, whatever feels good in your mind. And think about that for a minute and then think who you are now. And if you're writing that letter to your 19-year-old self, knowing what you now know, what would you tell that 19-year-old student today who's experiencing what you just talked about, that supportive community, the ability to grow and to push and to pilot or do whatever? What would
Hmm.
you tell yourself as a 19-year-old about with the wisdom you now have?
Oh, well, there's things I would tell 19-year-old Sarah, and then there's things that I'm not quite sure that 19-year-old Sarah would even listen to.
Okay, well, that might be true. I want to be your BFF. That's what I know. I love this. Okay.
But I think what I would tell that younger self is hold on for a fantastic ride because, and sorry, the dog just barked. Hold on for a fantastic ride because it's going to be amazing and it's going to surprise you at every turn, and be ready and be accepting of those surprises and always learn something from them. But also to, you know, contribute to the community in a bigger way, and continue to supporting your Salem sisters, you know, throughout their lives, because that's who you lean on when things get tough sometimes, and then that's what you need. You need that support network in all stages of your life. So I think that's what I would tell her, and maybe drink less.
Maybe drink less. Well, I was getting ready to say, did she listen? No, I'm kidding. Okay. I hate to do
Oh,
this.
one more thing though,
Yeah.
I think one more thing I would tell her,
Yeah.
the younger self, would be to take full advantage of all of the internship opportunities,
Ah, great.
because I do think that is really what helped set me apart when I was, looking at graduate schools and interviewing at graduate schools, was how many internships I had done at Salem. And looking back on it, I know I could have done even more. And I wish I had taken more opportunities to do additional internships or even study abroad, for a semester, those types of opportunities,
Yeah.
because they're so unique and they really do set you apart, and they give you such great life lessons along the way that I think that's another thing that I would tell young Sarah to do.
Well, and especially with all of the travel that you have subsequently had, to think about telling folks to take advantage of not only internships, but that global opportunity to travel if they can while they're at Salem, a semester abroad or a summer abroad or whatever they could do to grow and learn from that too, because you've already said how that's changed your life over time. So what wise things. Thank you. I know our students are probably very happy to hear what you said. So now, time to bring it home. Look right in the camera and say however you want to close this. What would you love to leave people with today? Kind of that final thought.
I think the final thoughts would be twofold. The
Yeah.
first, which is for everybody who might be watching, and that would be to trust science. And the second would be for the students, particularly, that if you're considering a field in STEM and you're not quite sure if you fit in, you will fit in, and you need to be there. And there's so much opportunity and potential in you to be successful in STEM. And so I would highly encourage you to pursue that educational and career path if that's what you're interested in.
Okay. And with that mic drop, thank you ever so much. I really, on behalf of all of us, everybody in the Salem community, thank you for sharing your story today, your journey, and frankly, most importantly of all, thank you for the difference you're making in this world, certainly partially at least as a result of your education at Salem. So I really appreciate you hugely, and you make us proud. Thank you. And to all of our viewers that are watching right now, I know you have enjoyed today. And I ask you to please come back in another 2 weeks and we'll have another episode of Salem Voices. Until then, Sarah, join me. We're going to count down to 3, and then we're going to say together, Salem Strong, okay? So on
Okay.
3. All right. 1, 2, 3. Salem.
Salem strong.
There you go. We'll do this. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.